You are listening to Pharmacy, IT, and Me, your informatics pharmacist podcast. Hey everyone, this is Tony Dow, and welcome to another episode of Pharmacy, IT, and Me. And as with every episode, we start off this one saying that the intended audience is everybody. So today's episode will be actually a rebroadcast of another episode from the Orange County Pharmacists Association podcast, in which I'm also the host for. And this is a rebroadcast because one of the people that I interviewed was Dr. David Chu, and he is actually an oncology pharmacist, but he does go over a little bit about how he went through an informatics type of rotation and how important it is for someone to have a clinical background when they are developing order sets or even just pulling data, so creative thinking and things like that. So hope you guys enjoy. So thank you again for being on the show, David. How are you doing today?
Hey, Tony. Thanks for having me on. I'm doing really well. How about yourself?
Good. Just a busy weekend. So yeah,
for sure.
So for the listeners, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I graduated from Western U about a couple years ago, and I pursued a PGY1 residency at VA Loma Linda, general residency, and decided to specialize. So I further pursued a PGY2 oncology at Kaiser Permanente Inland Empire, where I was trained mainly in the Inland Empire area from Fontana, Ontario to Riverside, but I also got a little bit research experience down in San Diego, as well as got to see some patients at City of Hope. Now I currently is a clinical research pharmacist and oncology specialist at Hoag Memorial Hospital Presbyterian, and my main job is just look after all the clinical research drugs, trial information, as well as building the beacon plan for them.
Okay, so you say you're currently working in oncology. What was your title again?
My title is a clinical research pharmacist.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I specialize in oncology.
Oh, okay. So clinical research pharmacist. So I guess for you, like, what is your day-to-day like? And then in comparison to other clinical research pharmacists that don't specialize in oncology, are there other ones that specialize in something else? And are your day-to-days like kind of the same, or they're kind of different? Like, how does that happen?
Sure. So my day-to-day, I wouldn't imagine to be drastically different from other people. I'm not strictly an oncology clinical trial pharmacist. I say that I'm specializing in oncology because I do have oncology training, as well as most of the trials happening at Hoag are at about 95% oncology base. We do have cardiovascular, neurology, and some other devices trials, but none of those are personally handled by me. They're handled by the clinical research nurses and coordinators. So in terms of the day-to-day, what I do is first, depending whether the day I have patients or not, the days I have patients, I will generally get in pretty early, check on their labs, anticipating what kind of day it will be for them. For example, it could be a regular chemo regimen arm where they'll be there for hours infusion. I'll make sure their labs are ordered appropriately and their beacon plans reflecting of what we're doing for the day, as well as communicating with the nurses to make sure that they understand that this is a research patient and there are some protocols and procedures we need to follow. Even though it may just be a simple regimen that everybody else gets as the standard of care, we still have to treat it as part of the study, and then they have to follow procedures per the good trial practices. On the days that I do not have patients, I typically will come in around the same time, but not as early because I don't have to follow up any labs beforehand. And I will generally start with looking at protocols who are waiting to be reviewed and looking at some of the beacon plans that we're looking to build in the near future. And I will tackle those one by one depending on their priority and type of trials. I will generally focus on some of the early phases trials. At Hoag, we conduct phase 1, phase 2, and a couple phase 3 studies, but I will focus more on the phase 1s because they logistically require more attention and details compared to the other studies. So that's usually my day-to-day. They are very oncology heavy, and I can imagine the other research pharmacists to be somewhat the same. I would say mimic maybe 95% of what I said describe on my day, but some people do different tasks. For example, when I was trained at Kaiser, their clinical research pharmacists could be either a local facility or a regional role. I follow both. In a local setting where the pharmacist received the drug and they perform the accountability and dispensing role, and then they review protocol as well, but not as extensively as the regional level. At the regional level, they receive drugs from the manufacturer and account for them and distribute to the individual facilities, or they connect and review protocols that will to be built into Beacon with the regional Beacon built-in at Kaiser.
Okay, wow, that's a lot of things. So just to back up a little bit, I guess what kind of made you really back up? So what kind of made you really get into pharmacy as a career path?
Sure. Well, I started with being a bioscience major at UCI, and I went on a couple of trips. I wasn't so focused on going to pharmacy per se in the beginning. I went on a couple of Flying Samaritan trips down to Mexico to help the inventory and some of the counseling points for the medication at that time, and sort of see how interactive pharmacists could be. I actually went into pharmaceutical industry, right after graduation from UCI undergrad, and I got to do clinical monitoring, site monitoring visits for clinical trials. Those people, typically, they are reviewing the logistics of the protocol and ensuring that the clinical trial sites perform every single duties per the protocol, and that's what the monitor generally do. And then I cover a wide range of areas, and it's pretty fun for a young fella right out of college, but it gets really tiring because you're traveling about 75% to 80% of the time throughout the year. And then after that, I decided, I really think knowing the drug, knowing the pharmacology, knowing how it works and the process gets to become treatment inside the human body was pretty fascinating. So I decided to apply for pharmacy. And interestingly enough, my second job while I was waiting for interviews and results of whether I get in or not was at Allergan, where I again dive into industry role. But at that time, I'm more of a local data analysis type of role. So I will say that even from the get-go, my work experience has always been pharmacy related. So kind of just dumped me right into the right profession.
Oh, wow. That's really good. So then, after going to pharmacy school and then doing your residency programs, I guess, how did the PGY2 prepare you for your current position today?
Sure. Yeah. So what I do from day to day or clinical trial pharmacy in general really does not require an oncology training. Even if I wasn't doing oncology, it doesn't require specifically what specialty that they're more of doing the trials on. It helps tremendously is because that I gone through a whole year intensive training on the oncology, and I know some of the nitty-gritty details about whether the chemo should have pre-medications, how it should be infused, what kind of side effects that I should expect clinically, not just on paper. Those experiences really helped me do my job a lot easier. I don't have to review the protocol and then review, for example, up to date or any primary literature or even package insert of the actual standard of care drugs as much because I already know those from my training. So it definitely streamlined my job a lot better by having the oncology training.
Okay. So also, from my understanding, we talked about this before, is that you had an informatics elective rotation in your residency program. And I was curious in how did that, was that very helpful with what you're doing today in terms of order set build and understanding, being able to interpret and then move things over to electronic world?
Sure. Yeah. So I had about 6 weeks, I would say, informatics training as a rotation as a PGY1 resident at the VA. And it's pretty fascinating because before that, I literally have no encounter or experiences or even a simple discussion about what informatics is. I knew that there's pharmacists that perform these roles, but I don't know what they do on a day-to-day. So it was a pretty eye-opening few weeks that I got to learn from the informatic pharmacists at my local institution. And what I learned from that is really just to break out of the shell because doing a residency, you're always thinking about clinical intervention and disease states guidelines, but doing informatics really almost force you to step outside the box. I did a lot of queries, which basically is pulling information about patients or specific drugs or any basic duties that the inquirer is asking you. And I practice a lot by building upon each other. For example, I got to learn how to pull patients on lisinopril 5 milligrams between certain dates. And to be able to do that, I have to learn multiple steps even to get to that point. For example, I have to even start to learn from the very basic of how to even select data from a certain date. And you would think it's more of a just clicking a bunch of buttons and the result will simply pop out, which is not the case at all. And also, because a large amount of patients, these results generate over quite a long time. So patience is something that I also learned from my rotation. So basically, I got to learn both clinical information from my rotation because I have to know how to extrapolate the data, and as well as how to approach it in a different mindset and not just a clinician, also as a computer science type of way, if that's the correct way to say it.
Yeah, close enough, I guess. So that's good. And I guess since you've been working in this position quite some time now, I guess what was your most rewarding experience that you've had in your current role, or even just through your training as well?
Sure. Yeah. So my current role, I deal with a lot of people who are basically running out of options because they're oncology and then they're oncology patients and they're going on trial. So there's not a lot of options left. And most rewarding part for me is being able to explain to them this items. Sometimes it may not even be medication per se, but this product that they're putting in their body with a bunch of code names, bunch of letters, and bunch of numbers that may somehow help them one way or the other, whether it's pharmacologically or it's a synergistic to bring out the regular chemotherapy's effects. And also, from my background training, I can tell from the class of product they are, whether they can be immunotherapy, chemotherapy, or vaccines, that what type of side effects that they can anticipate. And you really don't get a lot of those from the manufacturer or the sponsors or even the not a package insert, but they have a pharmacy manual that typically comes with these products, and they don't tell you too much. They tell you what the animals experience before coming to phase 1. So a lot of patients felt at ease knowing, some of the more common side effects, or at least common awareness of things that could happen on day 1 or day 2 when they go home, or maybe in a few months or a few weeks. So that's the most rewarding part of my day, put it in perspective.
Okay, that's really cool. So for me, I work in informatics and I do order sets for oncology, and we run into a lot of issues because oncology cycles are very complicated, especially for pediatric oncology order sets, which follow the Children's Oncology Group protocols. I guess when you run into something like that you haven't seen before, or you don't know how to handle in a order set setting, do you have a way to collaborate with people? How does that work with you? Do you speak with someone, or do you have a strategy that you do?
Sure. Yeah. So I might have to explain my answer in 2 parts. One, when I got training in Kaiser uses Epic, and I actually did a pediatric oncology rotation, and I got to build some of the COG leukemia protocols, and those are pretty much start with a backbone, and then you modify every single item in a plan. And a lot of times you do run into issues because these protocol gets amended, and also they're built by humans on the other side. So they have mistakes, missing tabs, or different doses are used between institutions or facilities. A lot of times when I run into logistic issues, I was lucky enough that one of the attendings that was training me at the same time, a Peds Onc, he happened to sit on the Epic building for the clinical aspect. So he knows the protocol really well. And he was able to walk me through the protocols and explain all the confusing part and explain why certain doses doesn't really match up, or logistically why, for example, in pediatric oncology, it's what we call the mega day, because they're admitted into the hospital and then all the drugs are given over a course of a few days. And sometimes a drug is placed on the day that's not intended, only because you don't want the drug to expire out at the end of that 24 hours. Mm-hmm. This is sort of a different perspective, because I would say maybe 75% of the oncology pharmacists deal in outpatient M-care setting. So every single item expired out and closed encounter at the end of the day. So dealing with pediatric oncology is fun, because you have to think about the near future. And also it takes a lot of manipulation, because you as an oncology pharmacist pharmacist, you have to make this plan that not only you understand and the inpatient pharmacists understand because they have to cover you to make this in the middle of the night, and as well as the nurses can understand. So the way that you build it's quite different, and you have to actually talk to those people to figure it out when the issue happens, how they interpret it. A nurse may interpret an issue, for example, when the med expired out. It does not mean it's done. It does not mean it's disconnected. It just means that she's on the wrong day. When the inpatient pharmacist run into issue that the med can be compounded, it's because the instruction is not put into the common area. So I think looking for resources and also talk to the people encountering the problem, not just myself, the encounter problem, it really helps putting things into perspective. But the other part of my answer is right now I'm dealing with clinical trial drugs. So when issues come up, I'm pretty much the only person that could answer a lot of questions. For Hoag Memorial Hospital, their Epic is actually on another institution's instance. So when issues come up logistically, when the entry is not correct or the entry is missing, it takes quite a few times to communicate the problem as well as problem solve, because a lot of times the analyst is not clinically trained. There are people that build beacon plans for clinicians, but they're not clinicians themselves per se. So to be able to utilize my informatics experience to think outside the box or think outside of a clinician's box to communicate with these analysts to explain to them what they need to be fixed really does help streamline the problem-solving process. Something that I had to explain to them the other day was that one of the drug where it has a mandatory pre-med but a PRN post-med. So that took a while for them to grasp that idea that I need them to sort of both show to be PRN, but one has to be given. So I basically put PRN in the comment box instead of making the frequency as a PRN for the pre-med. So that was an issue that I had to solve the other day. So, but yeah, looking for other people's perspective and their input, it really does help troubleshoot a lot of order set building.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it's kind of funny that you said mega day, because so mega day, that's what the term that you use over in Epic and over at the, so I work for a Cerner hospital and we use the term super day for the same kind of issue where, it's an extended day of treatment.
You just got to upgrade that.
Yeah, pretty much. So I guess for people who want to get into like being a clinical research pharmacist or even going to oncology, do you have any like specific advice for them?
Yeah, sure. So I definitely think doing a PGY2 it's worth it over and over again. Being able to gain the extra knowledge, tap into the pool of opportunities that, regular PGY1 won't provide you. It's something worth it to go into this field, because a lot of times clinical research pharmacists may not focus on an equal amount of different fields. You will focus more on one type of disease state more than the other, depending on institutions. So being able to specialize in those PGY2s really will help your job a lot easier. And also just, if you can try to pick up an elective rotation in PGY1 or even as a student for clinical research or a pharmaceutical company in general, you will be able to understand the other perspective. Not everything is utilizing a standard of care drug that's already FDA approved and you basically just dispense. You have to do a lot of background paperwork, background logistics, accountability. And we as pharmacists are trained to be very detail oriented, but being clinical research, bring it to another level.
Awesome. So if anyone wanted to reach out to you to, if they have any other questions, is there a way that they can contact you?
Sure. They can just simply shoot me an email. I generally reply pretty quickly, just the nature of my job. I build order sets. I'm on computer anyways.
Okay. So what's the best email they can contact you at?
Yeah. So my email will be david.chu@hoag.org. That's spelled HOAG.org.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll be putting that in the show notes too. All right. To be respectful of your time, I'd like to thank you again for taking some time out of your busy day to be on the podcast. And I'm sure our listeners learned a lot about your journey.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Alright, if you guys like this episode, you can subscribe and rate us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or any of your other favorite podcasting services. You can also follow us on social media on Twitter or Facebook at PharmacyITme, or Instagram at PharmacyInformatics, or by emailing me at tony@pharmacyitme.com. And I also wanted to plug a great networking opportunity called Pharmacist Connect. If you are familiar with Microsoft Teams or Slack Workspace, think of Pharmacist Connect as a large vetted one through Slack Workspaces. I've met some great colleagues on it, and there's even an informatics space within it as well. You can find out more by visiting pharmacistconnect.com, which is PharmacistConnect.com. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of Pharmacy ITME. And remember, technology is the tool, patient care is the goal.